Pro-life talk. Real world answers. This is Life Report.
Welcome to Life Report. I am Josh Brom. No Liz or Andrew tonight. Instead, we've got two very special guests, Pastor Jim Franklin from Cornerstone Church in Fresno and Father Larry Toschi from Our Lady of Guadalupe in Bakersfield. We are talking about the HHS mandate today. Everyone's talking about it, which is good, rightfully so. We should all be talking about this. What makes us a little bit different is we've got an evangelical pastor and a Catholic priest here to discuss this issue and talk about some of the things that I haven't heard talked about enough. So let me introduce our guests. Father Larry Toschi has been the pastor at Our Lady of Guadalupe Church for the last 2 years in Bakersfield. Right. He was born in Madera.
That's correct.
And has been ordained a priest since 1976. Pastor Jim Franklin with Cornerstone Church, as you've been the pastor there since 1993. 3,000 weekly attendance, is
Roughly,
that right? And the Feeding Fresno ministry, I always want to say Feeding Frenzy ministry. The Feeding
and sometimes it is. Sometimes it is.
But the Feeding Fresno ministry reaches 350,000 people every single year. Gentlemen, we are glad to have you today. Let's just talk about briefly what has happened. I think most people know something has happened, maybe not quite understand what exactly is happening, so let's help connect the dots. In January, the Kathleen Sebelius, the Secretary for the Health and Human Services Secretary, handed down a ruling that connected that said that contraception is preventative care, and so it ought to be covered under Obamacare, no copays, and that would include religious institutions like Catholic hospitals and other charities. Father Larry, let me have you talk about this. After there was weeks of intense opposition to this when this first came out. There's January 20th, and a few weeks later, President Obama starts talking about this compromise that he was making. He was going to fix the entire religious liberty problem and have this compromise. Talk about that compromise a little bit, and was it really a compromise?
Well, the compromise, he was trying to say he accommodated the freedom of conscience of believers who are opposed to contraception, sterilization, and abortifacient pills. And the way he's supposedly going to accommodate us is by saying, okay, Catholic institutions or other institutions do not have to pay for it if they object in conscience, but their insurance companies will have to provide it free. Well, that is no accommodation at all, because Catholic institutions are still having to see that their employees are covered for practices that are against our conscience. And many Catholic institutions are self-insured, so they will have to violate their consciences. There are Catholic insurance people that will have to violate their consciences. And in fact, the accommodation, there's been nothing changed in the written text. It's only a verbal statement to be in the news to make it sound like freedom of conscience has been respected. He promises some accommodation after the election, he says, which is also convenient. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. Okay, one of the issues, this has been frustrating for me when I listen, because I listen to not just pro-life people, but I listen to people on the other side talking about this, because I like to hear what everyone is saying. And one of the frustrating things
So you listen to the right side and the wrong side.
And so, like, listening to, Jon Stewart, who generally I enjoy watching, or Bill Maher talk about this, has been really frustrating.
I was glad to know you're getting it from educated people.
Right. Bill Maher, who I like less than Jon Stewart. What's been frustrating for me is hearing people talk about how it's like this, I can't believe in 2012 we're actually talking about women having access to contraception. Really? Is this really an access to contraception issue, or is that just a straw man argument?
Well, I want to go back to what the father said just a moment ago about this compromise. You notice when they started coming up with the compromise that the first thing that the administration goes to is who's paying for it. See, they have no concept of conscience. They don't understand why we object to this. Absolutely. It has nothing to do with who's paying for it or the amount of money. But that's where the left always goes to, because they think that money can fix anything. It is about conscience. It is about what we believe is right and wrong. It is about the protection of life. So I think that's the first thing that we look at and we see from this administration, that they just don't get it.
Right.
And that's where, again, the arrogance comes in.
Yeah.
Because as you mentioned, from where this thing started, is that suddenly the HHS secretary, she comes up and says, well, now here's what we're going to do. Let's do this. No, let's do it. Let's make everybody do it. So you're going to pay for this because we think that that's what you ought to do. We should have taken Nancy Pelosi at her word that when we pass Obamacare, we need to hurry up and pass it so then we can find out what's in it. Well, this is some of that stuff that we're finding out is in it. It really speaks of the arrogance of this administration, that they now think that they can basically mandate what people are going to do.
Part of Obamacare gives Kathleen Sebelius the power to basically say what she thinks is preventative medicine. There's no legislative body that has to approve this, or there's no checks and balances here. It's a huge amount of power, and it wasn't talked a lot about during the original Obamacare debate, and maybe it should have been.
If I could chime in with your word arrogance, to me the biggest arrogance is trying to define for us what a religious institution is. We're not a religious institution unless we are composed only of members of our own congregation, and we serve only members of our own congregation. So that's how they've disqualified educational institutions and hospitals, because of course we serve everybody, and we also employ many who are not Catholic. The religious institution, we cannot define ourselves. The government is going to define for us what is a religious institution. And this is the biggest infringement on religious liberty in the whole history of our country.
We've seen that with this administration, whereas a previous mandate that came down through another department was basically that it was going to be this administration that was going to identify or be the one who would decide who the members of the clergy were going to be, who would qualify as a member of a clergy. And that case came up, and they said, no, we're going to decide for this. And this was in a case that had to do with benefits or had to do with unemployment rights of an individual. And the Supreme Court struck them down unanimously.
9-0.
Now, again, when the Supreme Court decides something 9-0 and comes against this administration, it kind of shows you the direction that they're wanting, that they're wanting control. And just as you said, Father, that's why this is far more now than just about abortion. This really is about religious freedom. One of the things that this country was founded upon, one of the things that separates us from every other country, freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Several other countries say that they have it, but they don't. And I think that's why this is so important of an issue, because what, again, separates us from other countries and the rights that we have is that this is a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people, as one of our presidents has said, we the people, as our founding documents said. And so we've got to decide, and that's why I am so thankful for the Catholic Church and the way that the bishops have stood up and basically said, no, you have crossed the line, and we are not backing down from this. And the American people need to realize that. That's why I think that the administration and the the news commentators that you listen to, I think that's why they try to make this about abortion.
It's not just them, by the way.
I'm glad to hear that. It's that they try to make it about abortion. They want to make it about issues that, quote unquote, would divide America so that they can come down. And if they can cloud it within that, then that's where we lose this battle. And I think that's why not only just people of faith, but citizens of this country have got to see this for what this is. For if they can take away the church's rights and their conscience, then who's next?
And the way that the comics have clouded this issue is calling it an access to contraception issue, and it's just so insane. And it's just not true. The guys at Life Training Institute made a really good point on their podcast, which we'll link to, which is it's so weird that they're talking outside of both sides of their mouth. On one side, they're saying there's this access to contraception issue we need to fix, and on the other side they're saying, hey, practically everybody's on contraception. So it's like, how is that? There's clearly not an access problem if everyone's on it, and this isn't a big deal. There's not an access issue. Father Larry, is this just a Catholic issue?
No, absolutely not. As Pastor Jim was saying, this affects the liberty of everyone. If the government defines what religion is, what religious rights one has, the government is acting as if it's granting us our rights, that it's prior to and above our rights as individuals and as religious institutions. And it goes right to who we are as a country, as Pastor was saying. If we're not based on religious freedom, we're not the United States of America anymore, because that's how we started. That's what our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, even prior to the Constitution, stated. It's the reason people immigrated from Europe. They were looking for freedom. That's and I don't think I don't know everything about history, but I don't think there's been any attack like this in all the history of our country.
Yeah.
Well, what this does is it's going to remove us from our foundation. Talk a little bit about American exceptionalism. Our Constitution makes the statements in our founding documents that there are certain inalienable rights given to us by our Creator. Now, that's something that they recognize from the very beginning: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
That our government did not give that to us. They are the ones that are to maintain that and to guarantee that and protect us in that, because we are the government. They didn't give us those rights.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I believe this administration, and now to go into a little bit of the spiritual side of this thing, that's really what I think this is about, is that this is a denial by this administration that we do not want to recognize any other power than that of the government.
Yes.
And so when they see people of faith that say, listen, we have an objection to this based upon our beliefs, based upon our conscience, based upon something that a law cannot make us change. That no matter what law you pass or no matter how much money you give us, we're not changing these beliefs because it's a matter of our conscience. Yeah. And so if this government is allowed to do that, and I think that's really what they're attacking, is that right, if they take that away and say, well, it's now not the Creator who has granted us these rights, that's what makes the United States of America separate, then if it's the government that gives it, well, the government gives, and the government can take away.
And the government's basically making itself the religion of the land and imposing its religion on us, its values, imposing contraception. That they're telling us what's right and what's wrong. Yeah. And, you can think about euthanasia and who's going to live and who's going to die. Sarah Palin, she got a lot of flack for referring to death panels way back, but giving this authority to the government gives it absolute authority over everyone's life and death as individuals as well as institutions.
What decides that then, and we'll go back to Sarah Palin, is then economics, right back to where we were before. Well, you don't need to live because it's going to cost too much to keep you alive, or we don't need to let this child live because it's going to cost too much to keep them alive. And once again, they bring this back into some mathematical economic equation. Then you've taken conscience out of it, and that's why people of faith say, wait a minute, you don't give us that right to life. God gives us that right to life, and you can't take it away.
It's not euthanasia, it's healthcare cost containment. It's a problem. As Jim mentioned, all 81 Catholic bishops have come out and issued statements in opposition to this.
I'm that close to converting to Catholicism.
It must be 281. And I'm going to give Jim instructions after the broadcast.
Well, if it's just about the numbers, there's another 2,500 other religious leaders that are not Catholic that have also signed in opposition to that.
Absolutely.
Which is great.
We're so grateful for the sense of unity with this, too.
Yeah, I've never seen such unity between religious leaders. But one of my concerns was that I think there's a lot of Protestants that aren't taking this as seriously as Catholics because they think it's just about contraception. And there are some differences between Catholic views on non-abortifacient birth control methods that Protestants have. And I think I just want to spend a minute talking about Ella, because this is what's not being talked about very much. Ella is this new quote-unquote contraceptive, and it's a progesterone antagonist. Progesterone is the hormone that women have, and one of the things among many that it does is prepares the uterus for an implanting embryo. And this is one of those things that we know is an abortifacient. I've got a study here, an article from 2005 in the Human Reproduction Update. They're talking about what progesterone antagonists do. By the way, the only other progesterone antagonist on the market is RE486. the abortion pills. And this is just where they talk about contraception, they say mifepristone, or RE46, and other progesterone antagonists also have contraceptive potential. They may act by several mechanisms. At low doses, they inhibit ovulation. Low doses also retard endometrial development by virtue of their anti-proliferative action. As a consequence, the endometrium cannot support implantation. They're saying definitively this is what it does, is it changes the lining of the uterus so that an embryo, when it goes to implant, can't do it. That is an abortifacient, and everyone, Protestant, Catholic, is against that.
The way they try to get around that is they redefine pregnancy. You're not pregnant until it's implanted,
right.
And you can keep moving it down. You can go, well, what after a baby's born, too? Maybe he's not human until you want him to be human.
I don't care when you want to say pregnancy begins. What matters is, when does life begin? We
Absolutely.
know biological life begins
Absolutely.
with fertilization. Whether you want to call that the beginning of pregnancy or not, that doesn't change. We have here a living, distinct human being.
But this mandate is very much related to that, because it's really an extrapolation. They're trying to avoid the word abortion, and many contraceptives, most chemical contraceptives, have an abortifacient backup. When conception, if an egg is fertilized, it does prevent from implanting. The morning after pill, they start calling it emergency contraception. Well, it could function that way occasionally as contraception if it occurs before ovulation, but most often it doesn't function that way. But Ella is for a week later, and I'm not sure. The abortion clinic in Bakersfield, from what we hear from girls, they're getting it 6 weeks and 8 weeks pregnant. They're getting pills now for it.
That's right.
So they're using the word contraception, which is generally accepted, but it's really about abortion. And if this mandate stands, it's going to be all abortions can easily be mandated by the will of the president.
Yeah, let's talk about that. And just for clarification on this show, I've been cautious about what to say about some birth control pills, because there's some evidence that goes both ways, whether they're actually abortifacient or not. There's no question on whether Ella is an abortifacient or not. Let's talk about that slippery slope. There's a law in Washington right now being debated, HB 2330, which basically it would require health insurance companies that provide for maternity care in their plans to also provide for not just chemical but surgical abortions. Yeah. So there's this, we talk about slippery slope fallacies. I've been really careful not to talk about slippery slopes all the time, because sometimes there's not a slippery slope there. But here, we have the writing on the wall. They very well might not just be, well, you're going to have to pay for contraceptives and maybe even abortifacients, but pay for surgical abortions too one day. And it makes me wonder if there's a tactic shift. I was talking about this with my boss, John, today. Pro-choice people have been trying for decades to get taxpayer-funded abortions in every state. Some states have that, including California. Some states haven't. And pro-choice people usually lose that debate by about a 2/3 to 1/3 margin. I wonder if they're actually changing from, okay, let's not even try to get the taxpayers to pay for it. Let's just get all the insurance companies to pay for it.
Yes.
It seems like that's possible. Father Larry, let's talk about this. When people use this language, I mean, this whole thing is about contraception being called a preventative medicine.
Well, reproductive health care. First of all, there's nothing reproductive about contraception, much less abortion. And health care is you're basically putting in a woman chemicals that interfere with the normal, healthy functioning of her body.
Right.
So to portray it as health care, and I don't know your cautions on the show, maybe you'll have to edit me out.
No.
But but it's there are many more damages to health from contraception than positive uses. And
it just seems weird to refer to pregnancy as like it's a pathology or a disease.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's a healthy thing.
They refer to it as that we need preventative care in this. Well, yes, and they'll put in the same thing as with cancer or tuberculosis or other diseases.
Right.
That yes, we want to be sure we do everything to maintain health from those diseases, but people don't go out and contract that by choice. When you come to the point of pregnancy is a behavioral response.
Right.
I mean, again, without going into all the details, because I'm not Jon Stewart, is that I think we all know what causes pregnancy.
Yeah.
And to say this is a preventative thing, it goes back to what I believe is the agenda of this administration. We have seen this president, back to when he was a senator, to the type of legislation that he backed, that he was very pro-abortion.
Right.
We have seen him and his administration have been very pro-Planned Parenthood, even to the point that this administration stood up with the Democratic Party behind them to say, we will not fund our troops if you do not fund Planned Parenthood.
Right.
Now think what a statement that is to make. And even to the point this last week when Texas stood up and said, listen, we're not funding Planned Parenthood, that this administration threatened to take away federal funds from them if they wouldn't do it, and Texas told them, just go take a hike because we're not going to do it.
Right.
And so I think that this administration has come to a point that they have crossed that line.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I am praying and believing, that whereas we have been separated by so many things in times past, that finally we have seen this administration cross the line against conscience. We are awake enough to recognize if we do not stand together, we're in big trouble over this thing. And I mean, I've seen atheists that have joined our side on this because they see it for what it is, that it is far more than just, quote unquote, a faith issue. It really is about the rights of the citizens of the United States of America, and I think he's gone too far.
Right.
And I thank God for that. Speaking of this administration, I think he's gone too far, and he has painted himself in a corner. I don't think he'll back down because he's not a political individual. Many people think he is. I think he has a mandate. I think that he has an agenda, and he's not going to back down from it. He has all these backings, Planned Parenthood and others, that are coming behind him because they recognize if it doesn't happen this time and the country shifts to another president, another administration, then it's going to be a long time, especially with now people becoming more pro-life, with the education that is out there. This is their Waterloo, and they're going to go at it with everything that they can. I just thank God that enough citizens are waking up to say enough is enough.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what
I'm wondering, just this idea of treating pregnancy as a disease, it's related to what you were saying about economics being the basic issue. And they came out with the accommodation and said very clearly, insurance companies will be glad to give free contraception because it's cheaper than pregnancy. Well, that's not exactly true in the economics sphere, but in the philosophical sphere, you're treating a child, a human being. We were all conceived as human beings in the womb. You're treating him as a disease and something to be avoided because he's going to cost too much. Well, as you say, we know how to avoid pregnancy.
There's a lot of adopting couples that get a little bit miffed when they hear about this child that they have to wait for years to adopt because there's so few available for adoption, but those are diseases. That's a little bit frustrating.
Another thing, when they pass this off, the quote-unquote compromise, which I guess we should just accept, and then they'll tell us what it is later. Nancy Pelosi taught us that lesson, is that to really think that we are naive enough to think that, well, okay, the insurance company is going to pay for it. That the insurance companies, out of their goodwill, out of their obedience to the administration, is going to say, well, of course, we'll fork over our profits to pay for it.
Exactly.
We've been in this world long enough to recognize there is no free meals, and that, of course, the insurance companies are going to pass that right back to us. That's why, again, if this administration is arrogant enough to assume our lack of intelligence, that we're going to buy that and believe that. No, we're going to end up paying for it, but it's not about who's paying for it. It's about this is about the sanctity of life.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Father Larry, what would this mean if all these Catholic hospitals and institutions are effectively forced to close down by President Obama? What would that mean for the country?
It's strange to be taking a position by the government, taking a position so much against the Catholic institutions. The Catholic Church is the largest provider of health care and individual and education in the country, apart from the government. And so this is a burden that cannot be borne in conscience. The fines that will be imposed if it does not comply are are so exorbitant that the institutions will not be able to sustain themselves. Right. So they would have to close down, to the point one wonders if the mandate isn't really about trying to close down private institutions that do education, health care, and social services, charitable services, so that the government does it all and no one else interferes. Yeah.
Charles Chaput wrote an amazing letter. I'm just going to read a small portion of it that just really paints the picture of what this could look like. He said, Philadelphians may wish to reflect on the following facts. The Archdiocesan Secretariat for Catholic Human Services spends $278 million annually on services to the community. About 4,000 employees make up our Secretariat's workforce. Catholic Social Services is the largest social service agency in Pennsylvania and the largest residential care/social service subcontractor with the Department of Human Services of the City of Philadelphia. There's more, he says. Archdiocesan Catholic Health Care Services is the largest faith-based provider of long-term care services to the poor and elderly in the 5-county area and the 7th largest nationally. And our Nutritional Development Services, it looks kind of like your church. Our Nutritional Development Service Ministry serves more than 8 million meals a year to school children, summer programs, and child care centers. It provides 2 million pounds of non-perishable food to needy families and the elderly through its community food program. And then he closes with this. Much of the money used by these ministries comes from public funding. But of course, the reason these ministries are trusted with public funding is that they do an excellent job.
They're much more efficient than the government.
Yeah. And the service relationship works well without compromising the integrity of either the government or the church. In fact, in a practical sense, government often benefits more than the church. And yet, they're talking about basically making all of this shut down. And the government's not going to replace all that.
Our Catholic schools educate children at 1/3 of what the government spends for the public schools, and our parents still pay tax.
Y'all are missing it.
Okay,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
What you're saying makes sense.
We're making sense.
We're talking about the government.
Yes.
And so just throw that all out. I mean, the government will pay 20 times more for what it could cost the private sector to do it. That does it a better job, cares for. I mean, here in the name of health care, that we want to provide health care, we're going to shut down hospitals to do that. Now, that's how ridiculous the government is. And again, it proves the agenda that they have.
Okay, so we always end every show. What can you do? If you go to righttolifeca.org, we've got activism links. If you want to start being active on this, start from your computer. You can go right to righttolifeca.org and click on activism links. If you don't have a computer or internet, then just call your congressperson, call your senator. Do you own a business? Are you a pro-life business owner? If you are, this affects you. Okay, look, we could go on, but we got to end the show. So you can learn more about Father Larry at Guadalupe, Bakersfield.org. You can learn more about Pastor Franklin at cornerstonefresno.com. We need to get off the couch and exercise our American freedom that we have right now to get involved in the legislative process and try to stop this, because I fear if we don't stop this, pretty soon Planned Parenthood leaders are going to get what they want, and we're all going to be complicit in paying for chemical and surgical abortions. That's our show. Have a great week. Now go do something.
You've been watching Life Report, pro-life talk, real-world answers. Life Report is produced by Right to Life of Central California. Visit their website at fresnoprolife.org.